So if we go back to 1971, the U.S. government was basically in a state of complete and utter panic.
Oh, absolute panic, yeah.
Because, 20% of the enlisted soldiers deployed in Vietnam had become addicted to heroin.
Right, which is just a staggering number.
Right. And they were all about to come home. So you have policymakers in Washington bracing for this nationwide crime wave. They assumed this army of severe addicts was about to hit the streets.
Yeah, they were preparing for the absolute worst case scenario.
But then the data actually came in, and it completely defied everything we thought we knew. Because roughly 95% of those addicted soldiers came home and they just stopped.
Just put it down.
Yeah, no massive rehab interventions, no, relentless relapses. They just stopped.
It's honestly one of the most staggering statistics in medical history.
All right.
Because, you have to ask, how is that chemically possible?
Right.
And that exact question is what forces us to rethink pretty much everything we assume about compulsion.
And that is exactly what we're unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at the cycle of addiction today, but not just the surface level stuff about drugs or alcohol.
No, we really want to get into the mechanics.
Exactly. The exact mechanics of how a compulsion takes hold in the brain. We're looking at how it's simply, liking something, whether it's a substance or a video game or just scrolling on your phone, how that shifts into genuinely needing it.
And to really set the foundation for how we get to that point, it actually helps to look at the very root of the word itself.
Oh, I love the etymology of these things.
Right. So the word addiction actually comes from the Latin word adicere.
Adicere. Okay, what does that actually mean?
It translates to, well, to bind to or to give over. Originally, back in Roman law, it was this legal term used for someone who is physically bound to a creditor.
Wait, like indentured servitude?
Basically, yeah. They had a debt that they literally could not escape. And what's so fascinating is how closely modern neurobiology actually mirrors that ancient legal definition today.
Because it's a binding.
Exactly. Today, science doesn't define this as, a single bad event or a sudden cliff you fall off. It's defined as a recurring, self-reinforcing loop.
Oh, a loop.
Yeah, it's a process where every single pass through that loop literally, physically reshapes your brain's motivation circuitry.
Okay, let's unpack this because that completely changes the visual for me.
Oh, so?
Well, we usually think of addiction as this abrupt thing, right? Like one day you're perfectly fine and the next day you're just over the edge of the cliff.
Right, the cliff analogy.
Yeah, but what you're describing sounds more like a spiral staircase.
I don't like that.
Where every lap you take kind of walks you deeper into the basement and the stairs behind you start crumbling, so it gets harder and harder to climb back out.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it.
Right.
It's absolutely a spiral, not a circle, because with every lap, your actual baseline functioning drops.
Wow.
But to really understand how this spiral traps people, we first have to recognize how drastically our whole medical understanding has shifted over the last century.
Because we definitely haven't always looked at it as a neurobiological spiral staircase, right? I mean, if we go back to the early 1900s, how are people treating this?
Well, before the 1930s, the medical community was firmly stuck in what we call the moral model era.
The moral model.
Yeah. Back then, a compulsion or an addiction was seen purely as a failure of willpower. It was just a character defect.
So that spiral we just talked about was viewed simply as someone making repeated, stubborn, bad choices.
Exactly.
So the treatment was just what? Why don't you try harder? Be a better person.
Pretty much. It was heavily rooted in shame and punishment. You're just a bad person. But then, between the 1930s and the 1990s, things shifted into the disease model era.
Okay, so a step up.
Right. This was really heavily influenced by the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1935, and then later the American Medical Association. They actually formally classified alcoholism as a disease in 1956.
Okay, so they reframed it as a chronic relapsing illness.
Yes. It became something you have rather than something you do.
Which honestly, that feels a lot more compassionate. I mean, it takes that awful moral judgment right out of the equation.
It was a massive leap forward for compassion, definitely. But here is the catch. It was still based almost entirely on clinical observation.
Meaning they were just watching people.
Right. They were observing behavior, not biology. The real shift, the era we are in right now, happened in the 1990s. We entered the neurobiological era.
And what changed in the 90s?
Functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRIs, and PET scans. They became widely used.
Oh, the brain scans.
Exactly. For the very first time in human history, we could look directly at dopamine function in a living, breathing human brain.
Wow.
We can literally see the physical changes happening in real time.
Okay, wait. If I'm listening to this, I might be wondering if we can literally see this physical brain change on a PET scan now, why do these labels even matter? Like moral versus disease versus neurobiological. Does calling it a brain disease actually change anything practically for a person?
It changes everything because the definition of the problem dictates the treatment.
Right.
If society decides it's a moral failing, the treatment is prison or, being ostracized. If it's an incurable, permanent disease, the treatment is just managing the symptoms forever.
But the modern model.
Right. The modern neurobiological model views it as a process of brain adaptation. And the key there is, if the brain can adapt in one direction, it inherently possesses the plasticity to adapt in the other direction.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the mind. I want to look really closely at the modern model developed by these researchers, George Koob and Nora Volkow.
Yes, their work is foundational.
Because their research completely dismantled that famous 1980s public health messaging,
The egg in the frying pan.
Yes. This is your brain on drugs. That whole commercial.
Right, the 80s really popularized this idea of the hijacked pleasure center.
Which sounded so dramatic.
It did. And the assumption was that someone in the grip of an addiction was just relentlessly chasing an ever better high.
Like they just wanted to party and feel good all the time.
Exactly. But Koob and Volkow proved that is fundamentally incorrect. The brain's reward system doesn't just get hijacked, it gets worn down and fundamentally rewired.
Through this specific three-stage cycle.
Yes.
So let's break down those three stages, starting with the first one, which they call binge and intoxication, the high.
Right.
What is physically happening in the brain right here?
So this first stage is driven by dopamine, surging in a region of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. Now, here is a crucial detail that most people, even a lot of medical professionals, get wrong. Dopamine is not actually the pleasure chemical.
Wait, really? Because this always blows my mind. We throw the word dopamine around constantly in pop culture just to mean happiness.
I know, it's a huge misconception. Endorphins and other neurotransmitters,
Yeah.
they actually handle the feeling of pleasure.
Okay.
Dopamine is actually the wanting or predicting chemical.
A wanting chemical.
Yeah. Its job is to tag an experience as important for your survival. When you do something highly rewarding, dopamine teaches your brain to anticipate that reward and pursue it again. It's classic Pavlovian conditioning.
So the dopamine is just the brain taking really aggressive notes.
Basically.
It's saying, okay, whatever just happened felt good, so let's write down exactly where we are, who we're with, what it smells like,
Yep.
and let's make sure we do this again.
Precisely. It is a learning mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is when you introduce an unnaturally massive reward, whether that's a chemical substance or, honestly, a perfectly engineered algorithm on a social media app,
Right.
the dopamine surge is so loud that it overwhelms the system.
Which forces you into stage 2.
Yes. Stage 2 is withdrawal and negative effect, the low.
And this is where that spiral staircase really starts to descend, isn't it? Because if dopamine is just taking notes, why does it eventually start feeling so intensely bad?
Because the brain hates being overwhelmed.
It wants balance.
Exactly. It constantly seeks balance, which we call homeostasis. So when it's flooded with these massive, unnatural dopamine spikes, it protects itself through a process called downregulation.
Downregulation. Okay, what does that actually mean physically in the brain?
Okay, imagine you were in a small room and someone blasts the music so loud it actually hurts your ears.
Right.
To protect yourself, you put in earplugs.
Makes sense.
The brain does the neurobiological equivalent of that. It physically removes or desensitizes its own dopamine receptors so it doesn't get deafened by the noise.
Oh, wow.
But here's the catch. When the music stops, when the drug wears off or you finally put the phone down, you still have those earplugs in.
Oh, man. So now you can't hear normal, everyday sounds.
Exactly. Everyday joys. A really good meal, a nice conversation with a friend, a sunny day. They literally cannot register anymore because your brain has its earplugs in.
Just feels numb.
It feels numb, and it actually gets worse. Because as the reward system downregulates, a counteracting stress system boots up.
A stress system.
Yeah, it involves a chemical called corticotropin releasing factor.
CRF.
Okay, CRF. Think of CRF as the brain's internal fire alarm. When dopamine drops, CRF spikes. So you don't just feel a lack of pleasure. You experience genuine anxiety, intense irritability, and actual emotional pain.
Wow.
The researchers actually use a very specific Greek word for this state, hyperkataphia.
Hypoketophea, meaning like dejection or immense emotional distress.
Yes, and this entire shift in baseline is called allostasis.
Allostasis.
Right? Your brain's baseline completely changes. You aren't chasing a high anymore. The entire focus shifts to simply escaping the distress of that fire alarm.
Okay, to put that in everyday terms for the listener, it's like your brain's internal thermostat gets permanently cranked way, way down.
Yeah.
So you aren't turning on the heat to get cozy and warm anymore. You're turning it on just to stop freezing to death.
That is a flawless analogy.
Okay.
You are just trying to get back to zero.
Yeah.
And because you're freezing, you enter the third and final stage of the loop,
Preoccupation and anticipation.
the craving.
And this is where I feel like the brain just really turns against you, because you'd think if you are freezing and miserable, your logic would kick in and say, hey, this behavior is hurting us, let's stop.
You would think that.
But the physical machinery for logic literally goes offline.
Literally offline. In this third stage, fMRI scans show severely reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex.
And that's the rational part, right?
Exactly. That is the part of your brain responsible for impulse control, for weighing consequences, and for making rational decisions. So your brakes are essentially broken.
Which completely dismantles that old, just use your willpower argument from the moral model era.
Oh, completely.
How can you use willpower when the physical neuromachinery that generates willpower is structurally compromised?
You can't. Or at least, it is incredibly difficult. And while your prefrontal cortex is powered down, two other parts of your brain are highly active.
Which ones?
The basolateral amygdala, which processes emotions, and the hippocampus, which stores memories.
Ah, the note takers from stage 1.
Exactly. The hippocampus remembers the context. So a specific street corner, the smell of smoke, the sound of an ice cube hitting a glass, or even just a really stressful email from your boss.
Just a cue.
Right. When you encounter that cue, your amygdala triggers an intense emotional craving way before your prefrontal cortex even has time to boot up and assess the situation.
Wow.
You aren't reasoning your way into a relapse. Your survival circuitry is totally overriding your logic.
This totally makes me think of the nicotine data from the sources. Because the research shows that with smoking, that reward threshold, that thermostat you mentioned, it rises measurably over the years.
It does.
And even if you quit for a month or a year, that hippocampal memory doesn't just fully vanish.
No, it stays.
That's why telling yourself, oh, I'll just have one cigarette at this party is such a dangerous trap.
Because that one cigarette instantly reactivates the exact neural pathways you built over years of smoking. The tolerance and the memory are literally banked in your biology.
And the spiral just resumes right where you left off.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting to me, because hearing all this about downregulated receptors and CRF fire alarms and, impaired prefrontal cortexes,
It sounds bleak.
it sounds like biology is destiny. Like once the brain is physically altered, you're just trapped. But that brings us back to the Vietnam soldiers from the beginning.
Right. The twist.
Because the data reveals this massive plot twist. Environment can actually override pharmacology.
This is one of the most remarkable paradigm-shifting findings in all of addiction science. We have to look at Lee Robbins' study from the 1970s.
This is soldiers.
Right. When those soldiers were in Vietnam, they were in this high-stress, terrifying, incredibly isolated environment. And heroin was cheap, and it was everywhere.
So they built the neural spiral.
They built a spiral, but when they came home, they left the environment.
All the cues just disappeared.
Exactly. The stress was gone. The specific triggers were gone. They were back with their families in a completely different context.
Yeah.
And as we said, 95% of them did not relapse.
Which is mind-blowing.
It is. And around that same time, this researcher named Bruce Alexander at Simon Fraser University, he ran an experiment that proved exactly why this happens. It's known as the rat park experiment.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Uh-huh.
Because the old way of testing this was to put like a single rat in a bare metal cage, right?
Right.
Give it a choice between normal water and morphine-laced water. And the rat would predictably just drink the morphine until it died.
Which naturally led scientists to conclude that the chemical hooks of the drug were just inescapable. But Alexander noticed a huge flaw in the design.
Which was?
The rat was in solitary confinement. It was in a bear cage. So he decided to build Rat Park.
Rat park.
It's this massive, spacious enclosure. The rats had running wheels, they had toys, platforms, and most importantly, they had lots of other rats to socialize, play, and mate with.
So it was a good life. And they gave the rats in Rat Park the exact same choice, like normal water or morphine water.
The exact same choice. And the results were completely astonishing. The rats in Rat Park consumed dramatically less of the morphine water, even though it was freely available right there.
They just didn't want it.
They preferred the plain water. In some conditions, the socially connected rats used about 20 times less than the isolated rats.
That is crazy.
And get this, even rats that had been forcefully addicted in the solitary cages, when they were moved to Rat Park, they voluntarily reduced their morphine intake.
Wow. So if you're listening to this right now, you're probably wondering if a change of scenery cured 95% of addicted soldiers and, toys and friends stopped rats from drinking morphine, doesn't that completely blow up the idea that addiction is a permanent, incurable brain disease?
It absolutely challenges the permanence of the disease model.
I mean, doesn't that prove the whole once an addict, always an addict thing is kind of a myth?
It's a huge source of intense debate in the field right now. What these studies definitively prove is that removing the triggering environment, the stress, the isolation, and all those hippocampal cues from stage 3 of the spiral, it can interrupt the cycle far more effectively than anyone expected.
Right.
The physical brain changes are very real, but they do not operate in a vacuum. Context modulates chemistry.
Let's talk about that debate, actually, because I know the strict neurobiological disease model is not without its fierce critics today.
Oh, it has very prominent critics. Figures like Mark Lewis, who is actually a neuroscientist and a former addict himself, and psychologist Gene Hyman.
And what's their argument?
They argue that calling it a brain disease is medically inaccurate and deeply disempowering.
Disempowering.
Yeah. They suggest it is more of a developmental disorder or like a deeply ingrained learned habit that the brain can eventually unlearn.
Well, they point out that a lot of people naturally recover as their life circumstances change, just like the soldiers did. Like, you just kind of mature out of it.
Right. Heyman actually points to the epidemiological data on this. Most people who meet the clinical criteria for substance dependence in their early 20s, they simply no longer meet those criteria a decade later.
Really?
Yeah, often without any formal treatment. They get a demanding job, they have a kid, their environment shifts. The big concern for these critics is that the strict disease model risks minimizing the immense power of environment, meaning, and personal agency.
And the data shows that misunderstanding the science, or in some cases deliberately misapplying it, has led to massive, fatal, real-world consequences.
Sadly, yes.
We have to talk about the opioid crisis in the 1990s because it shows exactly what happens when we ignore the mechanics of this spiral.
It is a textbook example of fatal misapplication. In the 90s, the pain management industry, heavily backed by Purdue Pharma and their marketing for OxyContin, they promoted this deeply flawed concept called pseudo-addiction.
Pseudo-addiction, which, I mean, it sounds like a made-up corporate buzzword.
It effectively was. Here is how they justified it to the public and to doctors. They claimed that when patients started showing aggressive drug-seeking behavior,
Which is classic stage 3 craving.
exactly, craving and preoccupation, Purdue said they weren't actually addicted. They told doctors that these patients were just undertreated for their underlying pain.
Wait, really? So their medical response to someone showing clear, documented signs of entering the addiction spiral was to just prescribe them more opioids.
Exactly, because pain is subjective, right?
Huh.
So they handed doctors a very neat, compassionate-sounding narrative that completely ignored the neurobiology of downregulation and tolerance.
That is just...
They ignored the allostatic shift entirely. It was a tragic, willful misreading of the science that allowed the spiral to just accelerate in millions of people, leading to a catastrophic public health crisis.
That is honestly infuriating.
It really is.
But it makes understanding this 3-stage cycle so vital. Because if we look at today, this exact cycle is now being applied to everyday life in ways that are deeply controversial.
Yes, very controversial.
We are seeing what sociologists call concept creep. Like the diagnostic manual, the DSM-5, now officially recognizes gambling as a severe disorder.
Right.
The World Health Organization recently added gaming disorder. And now there is this massive debate around social media addiction and ultra-processed foods.
The central question of our era is this: are we pathologizing normal, everyday human behavior by forcing it into a chemical dependence model? Or are tech and food companies just successfully weaponizing this exact 3-stage dopamine cycle against our biology?
But come on, let me push back here on behalf of the listener. Are we really saying that eating a highly engineered potato chip or, scrolling a timeline on your phone is neurologically identical to doing heroin?
Well,
Because that feels like a huge leap.
it's a fair question. The scale of the dopamine release is absolutely different. Heroin produces an unnatural tsunami of dopamine that food or screens simply cannot match.
However,
The mechanism is identical.
identical.
Yes, when you look at how an algorithm feeds you endless, unpredictable short videos, it is utilizing what we call intermittent variable rewards.
Intermittent variable reward.
Right, that is the exact same psychological hook as a slot machine in a casino. It spikes dopamine, teaching your brain to just keep scrolling.
And with junk food, it's all about the bliss point, right?
Exactly.
The exact perfect ratio of salt, sugar, and fat designed in a lab to hit that stage 1 binge criteria perfectly.
Yes, and proponents of behavioral addiction categories, they point to fMRI scans showing that pathological gamblers had the exact same reward circuitry disruptions, the downregulated receptors, and the impaired prefrontal cortex as chemical users do.
Yeah.
The allostatic shift happens with behaviors too. When you are used to the extreme dopamine hit of endless TikToks, reading a physical book feels incredibly boring. The thermostat has been lowered.
Because the earplugs are in.
Exactly. The earplugs are in. You scroll not because it feels amazing, but to escape the subtle negative affect of boredom. You enter stage 2.
Wow. Okay. So knowing all of this, the mechanics, the environment, the debates, I want to make sure we have thoroughly dismantled the old way of thinking.
Let's do it.
We've touched on a few of these myths, but it's worth reiterating because they are just so ingrained in our culture. For instance, the idea that someone has to hit quote-unquote rock bottom before they can get better.
That is a cultural narrative, not a scientific one. There is zero biological requirement for a rock bottom.
None.
None. In fact, waiting for a catastrophic low just allows the brain's spiral to dig even deeper. Many people exit the cycle early through changed circumstances, a new environment, or therapy, long before their life completely falls apart.
Because of the Rat Park findings?
Exactly. Connection and purpose are the antidotes, not absolute destruction.
Okay, and what about relapse? Because in the old moral model, a relapse is seen as just a total failure. But if we look at the brain mechanics, it seems almost, well, inevitable.
It's not inevitable, but it is a mechanistically explainable feature of the cycle.
But I want to challenge that a bit because I can hear someone saying that sounds a little like a free pass. Like, if relapse is expected, where's the accountability? Doesn't that just give someone an excuse?
It's not a free pass at all. It's simply a medical reality based on how the hippocampus stores those cues we talked about.
The memories.
Right. Think of it like hypertension or type 2 diabetes. In the chronic disease framing, addiction relapse rates are actually completely comparable to non-adherence in those other chronic illnesses.
Oh, really?
Yes. If an asthma patient has an attack because they stop their daily medication, we don't say they're a moral failure.
Right, we don't judge them.
Exactly. Clinically, a relapse is just a signal to adjust the treatment strategy. It is not proof that the person is fundamentally broken.
That reframing is just so important. So as we wrap up this deep dive today, there are 3 absolute must-remember takeaways for you listening right now. First, the cycle of addiction is a downward spiral, not a circle. With every single lap, your brain's baseline functioning drops due to that receptor downregulation.
The earplugs.
Right. Second, the driver of the behavior fundamentally shifts. You start chasing the high of pleasure, and you start desperately trying to escape the distress of the brain's fire alarms.
The allostatic shift.
Exactly. And third, environment and context can radically override your brain's chemistry.
And, if we take that last point about neuroplasticity seriously, it leaves us with a really profound realization.
What's that?
Compulsion isn't just about the specific pharmacology of a substance or the code of an app. It is deeply tied to isolation, to chronic stress, and to the context of our daily lives.
Which brings us right back to where we started today. That phone you can't stop scrolling, or that late night habit you just can't seem to break.
Exactly. If you find yourself endlessly spiraling, the science suggests we really should be looking at the modern world we've built.
Because it's full of triggers.
We are more isolated, we are more stressed, and we are more surrounded by perfectly engineered dopamine triggers than any humans in history.
Right.
So you have to ask yourself, are you struggling because you lack willpower, or are you struggling because you are living in an isolated cage instead of a rat park?
Man, that is a question we all need to be asking ourselves. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Take a look at your own habits and your own environments with this totally new perspective. We'll catch you next time.